Hello, everybody. Welcome back for our last match on Sunday for the Victory Road World Cup of Pokemon VGC, sponsored by Elgato. I am back with Jamie Boy. We are running it back from that game one today, which was super exciting. But now I think we have a really interesting match this time, Jamie.
Yeah, it's going to be between Japan and France. So two countries that are very classically known to be very, very strong. Japan, of course, having multiple world championships, and France being a very, very strong team coming out from Europe as well. So definitely going to be an exciting match between these two players.
Yeah, and I think France and Japan were both in pretty tough groups in the original group stages, so it's nice to see both of them making out, but then having to go through the gauntlet again of playing each other. So, it depends exactly how their other two teams in their group play for each of them to go forward here, but, Japan has always been known for one of those teams that has really interesting meta versus, some other parts of the world, Europe or North America. So I think that will be reflected a little bit as well in the teams, which I am excited to show you as we move forward. But hopefully when we cut over to Japan and France's standings, we'll be able to see exactly what is going on here. But of course, still no results early right now because we won't have them put up till probably tomorrow or so. But this whole group is insane. Peru has gone in an absolute run here. Japan, Mexico, and France. So this is probably the scariest out of all the groups, in my opinion.
Yeah, some people tend to refer to these kind of groups as the group of death, and this is definitely a contender for that. Some very, very strong teams going into this group, and we should be seeing some fantastic games between all of these teams. It's definitely going to be interesting to see which two manage to advance, because I could see all four of those teams advancing to the next stage, but only two of them can, and we'll have to see which one is going to be getting the advantage into this week one. As we can see here, France have got 4 games already against Japan's 3, so at least guaranteed a tie. So Japan are going to be fighting for that tie, but France could be taking the win here if Florian is able to get the victory in this game.
Yeah, which is really interesting as well because Japan had the most match wins during the original group stage, which I believe was 20 wins across all of their games, which was crazy. It was easily the most among any of the other teams. But they're in this crazy group right now. Peru, I know, had an absolutely insane run. I think it was Peru in the same group as England. Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes,
United Kingdom.
Yeah. Peru actually absolutely demolished the United Kingdom.
That's what I thought. I didn't want to say that because I thought that would be a little rude. One thing we do see.
Factual.
One thing interesting as well is Japan is mostly running Zacian and then Incineroars all the way straight down that column, and we see a little bit of variability with France with some Calyrex Shadow Rider and then one Necrozma Duskwing. Or Dawn Wings, excuse me. So really interesting to see that as well. Just, Japan seems to be running a lot of the same Pokemon, but we will see, I think, with Kohei's team that is a little bit different.
And we can have a look at what Kohei is going to be running in this game. It is going to be Lunala, so a Pokemon we don't see too often, but definitely a strong restricted nonetheless, having access to that Meteor Beam Power Herb to be able to take care of the Incineroars very quickly, one of the main threats to it, and then being able to put on some good damage with the Moongeist Beam. And you've got the 2 Dark Pokemon there with the Incineroar and the Moltres, keeping the Lunala safe from opposing ghosts like that opposing Calyrex Shadow Rider that you can see very often. Then just rounding out with the Mungus and the Stack Attacker for a Trick Room mode, and also a fast mode with that Regieleki.
Yeah, and Kohei is an extremely accomplished player, the 2020 Japan national champion. So, absolutely nothing to shake a stick at here. The 2017 World Championship Day 2 player, 4-time Japan nationals competitor. So again, someone who you really should be fearing. You know that he's an absolutely incredible player, and Japan is just full of good players. So to be a good player in Japan means you're a really good player in general, just because the competition there is so high. And then moving on, I think, to Florian Henry's team as well, we'll be able to see what he is running, but he's running something more standard, except for that one Gastrodon there. So he has that Zacian, the Incineroar, the Gastrodon, the Entei, the Amoonguss, and the Zapdos. So that Gastrodon is a Pokemon that, I would assume more to be running against something for maybe a Kyogre here, but it is a Pokemon that I think is really interesting for this match.
Yeah, and you've got 2 fire types on Florian's side of the field as well, so you definitely want to be keeping those fire types safe from those water attacks, whether that's from that Kyogre or the Urshifu Rapid Strike as well. Keeping both of them safe from the Surging Strikes is definitely going to be very beneficial, so definitely a good pick here coming out for the Gastrodon. Rounding out, not with the Rillaboom or the Urshifu at all, so just got the Incineroar as a classic partner for the Zacian, and definitely some strong picks as well. Entei and Zapdos definitely make a lot of sense as picks as well. The Entei going to be able to threaten down opposing Zacians very well. The Zapdos going to do well interposing Zacians as well and the Kyogres. So going down into the Lunala, though, it's going to be a bit more of an awkward one.
Yeah, it's a great team for something like a Kyogre, except Japan didn't run any Kyogres this week, so that's something you also have to pay attention to in terms of building for a meta. One thing that's really interesting to me too is Lunala is one of those Pokemon that can notoriously carry Wide Guard, and you're not facing any Pokemon with really double targeting moves on the opponent's team there, except for maybe if that Entei is running Eruption, and it might be a special Entei or something of that sort, or maybe even like a Muddy Water from the Gastrodon something here. But it isn't it's not facing something like a Kyogre or a Groudon with that Water Spout, Origin Pulse, or Precipice Blades.
Yeah, and it looked like these players knew exactly what they wanted to do, locking in pretty quickly there. So yeah, there's not too many strong ways through the Lunala, except for that Incineroar, but then you've got some good Pokemon to be able to support with that. You've got your own Incineroar to match the fake outs, and then you've got the Gastrodon that's going to be threatening it down pretty heavily as well. And yeah, it's just going to be a very, very supportive lead. So with that Incineroar and the Amoonguss coming out from Florian's side of the field, but Lunala and Amoonguss coming out for Kohei's side of the field. So you've got the Amoongusses staring down each other. You can get the spores off into the opposing Pokemon. You can put a stop to that with the Incineroar if you just go for the fake outs, but then you're just going to be trading the spores in that case. So still a very awkward position. It's probably going to be a little bit of a slog at the start, because you're not going to be putting on too much offensive pressure. You still need to keep that Lunala safe from the dark moves that the Incineroar could go for, and Spore would definitely be a good way of stopping that. But then they could just be going for a fake out to put a stop to the spores instead. And Lunala is going to be switching out here, fearing the dark moves that could come out from that Incineroar.
Yeah, Stakataka switches in here, trying to take any of those moves that could possibly happen. A Rage Powder, though, for the Amoonguss on Florian's side, so no fake out here either. Instead, that Incineroar goes for a parting shot into that Stakataka slot, going to be lowering the attack and special attack here. But interesting, too, that Lunala wasn't in a comfortable position to go for something like a Trick Room, which the Stakataka would have absolutely loved here. Maybe being able to move slower than some of these Pokemon. But, Amoonguss is going to very comfortably take a Gyro Ball by being slow itself. Incineroar with that parting shot, though, switches out, and the Gastrodon comes in, while a Spore from Kohei's Amoonguss does put that Gastrodon to sleep, so it came in and immediately took a nap.
And not going to care about a Rage Powder at all. So it's definitely a bit of a stalemate when you've got your Amoonguss staring down the opposing Amoonguss. You can always go for the Spore into the partner Pokemon, and then you don't really put on too much pressure onto the opposing Amoonguss. If you're carrying something like Sludge Bomb, you can do some reasonable damage, but a lot of Amoonguss are tending not to carry that poison type move anymore. Pollen Puff is very common for that extra healing as well. Grass Knots are good for the Kyogres, so you do struggle to fit room onto the Amoonguss for an offensive poison type attack. So when you've got the two Amoongusses staring each other down, it's just going to be a very slow game, just spreading those spores around and just waiting for Pokemon to wake up.
Yeah, Gastrodon actually hard switches out here for that Incineroar, getting another Intimidate off onto both of these Pokemon. We do see the Grass Knot here actually into that Incineroar, does very little damage because it's not all that heavy and not weak to grass type moves here. And then we also see one move fails that I wasn't able to see here, but we do get the Heavy Slam from that Stakataka onto the Incineroar slot as well.
Yeah, that was a failed spore into a safety goggles of the Stakataka, so definitely going to be a very good position for Kohei here, getting some very good damage with the body press onto the Incineroar, covering the switch into the back into the Incineroar as well, going for the Grass Knot and the body press. That combination is probably still enough to knock out the Gastrodon regardless, and then catches the Incineroar very nicely as well. And now the Amoonguss on Florian's side of the field is effectively useless. It can't do anything like the spore into the Stakataka. Maybe if it's carrying Grass Knot, it can do some reasonable damage because Stakataka is going to be so heavy. But yeah, that is definitely another option as well. It could still get some healing onto the Incineroar.
Yeah, that Pollen Puff from the Amoonguss on Florian's side heals up that Incineroar, a really great deal here. Instead, that Fake Out went into the Stakataka on Kohei's side as well, so that Stakataka wasn't able to put off any pressure here. So, the Pollen Puff is a really nice move. It does, allow that healing, especially after it just swapped in and took so much damage, but it does show possibly that, this Amoonguss on Florian's side isn't really able to do a whole lot in front of the two Pokemon here.
And it's definitely going to be a stalemate for both these players. You probably want to get into a position where you can get your Amoonguss off the field, but if you do that and the opposing Amoonguss stays on the field, then they're freed up to go for those spores again. So at least the Stakataka is going to be safe from the spores for the safety goggles, and yeah, you're still not going to be doing too much offensive pressure, and so we saw how much the body press can do into the opposing Incineroar, so even if they go for the Rage Powder of the Amoonguss, that's still going to be able to hit it, but then at the same time you can just heal up with that Pollen Puff, because it does about the same amount of damage as the body press as the healing with the Pollen Puff.
Yeah, a Flare Blitz comes out into the Amoonguss on Kohei's side, but it is holding that Aqua Berry, so it is not going to be taking as much damage from that super effective fire type attack this turn, but it is going to be taking that full damage in any subsequent turns going after. The Amoonguss here goes for another Pollen Puff, healing up that Incineroar all the way back to full health, even though it just took a little bit of recoil as well from that Flare Blitz. And then a Trick Room here from the Stakataka, actually, so changing up the dimensions, making that Stakataka going to be the fastest thing on the field.
Yeah, now you can get the body presses into the Incineroar a little bit easier as well, and start to get maybe some damage going with the Amoonguss as well. So still pretty awkward. You've lost your Aqua Berry on the Amoonguss at this point, so you're going to be in range of any other attack that the Incineroar would want to go for. If you do want to switch out the Amoonguss, get some regenerator action going, then you'd be able to switch it back in at some points to be able to threaten those spores again. But there's still not really too much damage potential being on the field. So you've got the body presses that can go into the Incineroar, but that can be healed up by the Pollen Puff at this point. And now you've got into a position in Trick Room where the body press would go off into the Incineroar first, and then the Pollen Puff would heal it. So still going to be pretty awkward getting some damage down on the field.
Yeah, Incineroar actually switches in for the Amoonguss on Kohei's side here. Another body press, like you said, into the Incineroar on Florian's side. And then we see a Spore actually from the Amoonguss onto the Incineroar that just switched in. So a very interesting call here, predicting that switch out of that Amoonguss and getting that Incineroar to sleep, while the Incineroar goes for a parting shot onto the Stakataka on Kohei's side, and will switch out for one of the Pokemon left in the back for Florian. And we have actually now seen all 4 Pokemon on Kohei's side, because he did not hard switch in a Lunala, which would have also possibly gone to sleep that turn.
Yeah, and sporing the Amoonguss, a very good play there. Even if the Amoonguss stays in, you're still effectively in a neutral position where the opposing Amoonguss isn't doing too much. Doesn't really matter if it stays in, because then you're not going to be able to do too much to the opposing Amoonguss, but then you're able to catch the switch in. Like we were saying, the stalemate trying to be broken by the Incineroar from the Amoonguss. You get the Spore down into the Incineroar, and now you've effectively broken that stalemate at this point, especially since you've got your Zacian down. It is still in Trick Room, so it's still going to be threatened down by the Stakataka at this point, but you've got a load of Intimidates, you've got the parting shots down onto the Stakataka, so the Gyro Balls won't be doing too much damage. Body Press will still do some reasonable damage because that's not affected by the Intimidates and the parting shots. But the Zacian is now in a very solid position. The Incineroar is definitely going to be staying asleep. It's taken a turn asleep already from the Spore, because it's when it switched in. So yeah, the Zacian is still in a very, very solid position, even if it is in the Trick Room.
Yeah, and that Zacian is going to be the last thing moving on this field here, but the Stakataka switches out after, taking all that parting shot drop there, and the Amoonguss switches in for it, so hopefully trying to get some regenerator HP back and doing a little bit more here. But then I believe that we saw a Spore fail as well from that Amoonguss on Florian's side, a Behemoth Blade coming out from that Zacian, and that is going to go into the Incineroar slot, who was asleep. It does a pretty good chunk of damage though, and that Incineroar will probably still be staying asleep for one more turn.
And you've got some good damage into the Incineroar now. Probably going to be in range of any fighting move that the Zacian would want to go for at this point. Even if it gets intimidated, probably going to be able to pick up the knockouts. But the Amoonguss has hit the field once again for Kohei's side of the field. You're still in Trick Room, so you can still get that Spore into the opposing Zacian at this point. Maybe even go for some Pollen Puffs into your Incineroar as well to start healing that back up, because you've got some nice recovery with that Regenerator with the Amoonguss, so that's sitting a bit more healthy at this point. And yeah, you definitely threatening down those Spores into the Zacian. We'll have to see if Kohei is able to do what Florian did and Spore that Amoonguss to try and catch that Incineroar.
Yeah, the Amoonguss instead for Florian switches out here into that Incineroar, like you said. Zacian here is going to go for a Protect, so actually not going to be taking any damage, or possibly a Spore, which I think is even more important here. But instead a Pollen Puff, like you said, from Kohei into his own Incineroar here, going to get that HP all the way back up to full and allow it to kind of bait out the rest of these rest turns, but it does stay asleep for this turn. No wake up here yet.
Yeah, so getting to call the Protect on the Zacian very nicely, get that Incineroar back up to full HP, so it can start pivoting once again. And it's taken a few turns of sleep now at this point, so should be waking up pretty soon, getting that Flare Blitz off into the Zacian that are just protected maybe, or going for the parting shot to reduce its attack back down. The Incineroar on the opposing side of the field for Florian is still sitting at half HP, so that one has been damaged a reasonable amount. So you probably need to start focusing down that Incineroar so that you can start taking away some of the pieces that could be pivoted out for Florian's side of the field. But there's still not really too much offensive pressure on the field with just the Amoonguss and the Incineroar at this point. You can go for some Spores because you're still in the Trick Room, or you can just switch out to get your Regenerator going once again, switching back out into that Stakataka.
Yeah, the Incineroar goes for a fake out into the Stack Attacker, which was that Amoonguss slot here. And then we do see the other Incineroar finally wake up from that sleep. It goes for the parting shot onto the Zacian here, and we'll switch back. It could again be that Amoonguss, which would of course be pretty comfortable in this Trick Room environment, or it could possibly be that Lunala who we saw in the very beginning. You know, this is really the tough part about playing with Zacians, is it's so much of it is positioning, and it's so much careful movement, especially, you know, if you can get your board state set up the way that you want it, you're going to be in pretty good shape. This Zacian, though, does go for a Behemoth Blade, though it is going to go into the Stack Attacker that switched in here, which does take that a pretty good chunk of damage, just under half of its HP. But now, you know, we're starting to run low. The Trick Room is finally ended.
Yeah, so the Zacian is in a very, very comfortable position at this point as well. You know that the Occa Berry has been taken care of by the Amoonguss as well from the earlier Flare Blitz. You could be getting the knockout if you double up into that Amoonguss with the Flare Blitz and the Behemoth Blade at this point, and that combination is probably going to be enough on the Stack Attacker as well. So if you do go for both those attacks into one of the slots and you don't fire it off into a Protect, you're probably going to pick up a knockout unless Pokemon switches out here. Definitely could be switching out into the Incineroar. That is a very good switch in for an opposing Incineroar and a Zacian as well, if you want to get that Intimidate down. Or you could just go for a Rage Powder, try and get that Trick Room set up once again, or even just try and fire off some Spores. If you're expecting the Stack Attacker to be KO'd to the double up, you could get a Spore off, but just a Rage Powder instead.
Yeah, Rage Powder going to be directing all of the attacks here from this Zacian and Incineroar on Florian's side into that Amoonguss. We've seen the Zacian take so many big hits onto Amoonguss before with this Rage Powder. This one is pretty bulky though, so it does sit and just gets to under half of its HP here. A Flare Blitz from the Incineroar will go into that slot as well. This should be enough to knock it out, and it is. So now that this Amoonguss is off of the field, it won't be able to do anything like a redirect. It won't be able to put any more of the Pokemon on Florian's side of the field to sleep. So the only thing he has sitting in the back is that sleeping Gastrodon. But a Gyro Ball here is doing a ton of damage from the Stack Attacker into the Zacian on Florian's side. So now, you know, Kohei still has the ability to set up Trick Room because all of the Pokemon on his side are going to be slower, but there is still the issue of this Dark-type move from this Incineroar as well, possibly going into this Lunala, who, even though it has its Shadow Shield, is not going to want to take one of those.
And one of the slight downsides of the Lunala as well is you only get one shot of the Meteor Beam into the opposing Incineroar. Moongeist Beam probably not going to be enough at this point. It should be enough on the Zacian at least, so if you want to preserve that Meteor Beam, you could go after the Zacian. But if you go for the Meteor Beam into the Incineroar that does switch out, that's going to effectively, you lose the way of being able to do some good damage to the Incineroar. And you've broken the Amoonguss now on Kohei's side of the field, so that should free up your own Amoonguss at this point. You won't have a stalemate where you're effectively playing 1v1 and you've got the Amoonguss that are just sporing each other. Now you've got the only Amoonguss left on Florian's side of the field, so if they're able to position that Amoonguss, be able to get some more spores off, that's going to be very nice, especially into this Lunala as well. Because that Incineroar has taken so much damage at this point as well, it's not going to be as threatening to this Lunala as it could have been if it was a higher HP.
Both of the Pokemon here for Florian switch out, so we now have the Amoonguss and the Gastrodon on the field instead of that Zacian and Incineroar. The Stack Attacker as well also makes a hard switch here, so that is going to bring in the Incineroar on his side of the field, and that is going to, you know, the fake out pressure could be pretty useful into either of these two Pokemon here, except that Gastrodon will still probably take at least another turn of sleep. The Lunala here is the only thing that stays in, and it does actually go for a Meteor Beam here, so that will charge up and attack onto one of these two Pokemon so long as it doesn't miss, which is probably the biggest downfall of Meteor Beam here. If it is into either of these two Pokemon, they're both going to tank it very comfortably because they're both so bulky, and this could really, you know, be a tougher gank here because now that Gastrodon only takes 50 HP from that Meteor Beam, which I believe is a critical hit as well, possibly, and then it eats a berry as well on top of that.
Yeah, that critical hit definitely helping out there. Getting that berry activated quite early, so maybe it's going to be in range of a +1 Moongeist Beam at this point. And the Amoonguss is definitely threatened down here as well by the Lunala and the Incineroar, so a little bit of a swing of momentum for Kohei there, using up the Meteor Beam, the Power Herb Meteor Beam, at least to be able to get that one-turn shot onto the Incineroar. It may be in range of a +1 Moongeist Beam at this point, so maybe it doesn't matter too much that you've used up the Meteor Beam with just one turn of charge while the Incineroar didn't take that attack, because now the Lunala is boosted, it's going to be able to threaten some really, really good damage onto the opposing side of the field. The Zacian is definitely going to be in range because it's taken so much damage as well. Incineroar possibly in range, it'll be pretty close. So really you just need to be able to break through this Amoonguss because the Gastrodon isn't able to move because it's still sleeping. You just get the double up into the Amoonguss, you'd be probably getting a knockout.
Yeah, the Gastrodon must have gone for Protect here, as the Amoonguss also goes for a Protect, does not get hurt by the Pokemon here from either of the sides of Kohei, so possibly, a Moongeist Beam and a Flare Blitz weren't able to knock that Amoonguss out, but this Gastrodon still sleeping means that it should be waking up this next turn, I believe.
And being able to stall out a turn so that Gastrodon can wake up a little bit easier, effectively lose nothing that turn except for a sleep turn, which we want to be burning. So the Amoonguss, now it's definitely is threatened down by that double up. You could just go for the same move again, doubling up into this Amoonguss with the Moongeist Beam and the Flare Blitz. Even if there's a switch in, that Pokemon would be KO'd at that point. So yeah, the Gastrodon, even though it burned the turn of sleep, is going to be switching out itself instead here, not going to be trying to go on the offensive.
Yeah, Incineroar switches in here, getting Intimidate down once again, getting Fake Out pressure onto the opponent's Incineroar possibly here, just for a future turn, just to make sure that it's not dealing any Flare Blitz damage. But instead we see the Moongeist Beam from this Lunala, the signature move, which is one of my favorites. I absolutely love Lunala in Ultra Series. Goes into this Amoonguss, does a really good chunk of damage for such a bulky Pokemon, well over half of its HP, but it is going to eat a berry here, revealing the item on that Amoonguss to be that Aqua Berry. So if this does KO through the Aqua Berry, which it does not, so that is an absolutely huge survive with that Aqua Berry on that Amoonguss.
Yeah, the Incineroar switching in, getting that Intimidate down onto the opposing Incineroar, very crucial. Now the Lunala is going to be sleeping because that Spore was able to be fired off at this point, and the Amoonguss is able to survive that turn. It could get some Regenerator going once again if it decides to switch out here. And now that Lunala is sleeping, this could be an opportunity for that Incineroar to go on the offensive, to try and break that Shadow Shield. We'll have to see if that Incineroar is going to be carrying a Dark-type move. Not all Incineroars do. There's some just opt for Flare Blitz as the offensive coverage. That would still be able to break the Shadow Shield. You've got to break the Shadow Shield at some point, whether that is with your Incineroar ready for the Zacian to be able to hit it with a Behemoth Blade in the back, or you're just going the offensive with a Dark-type move from the Incineroar to get some really good damage as well. But the Aqua Berry coming out from both players here, very crucial, allowing the Amoongusses to survive longer than they probably should have done and being able to get those spores off. So getting that Lunala sleeping here is going to be very, very good for Florian.
Kohei sends his Incineroar back here, is going to bring that Stack Attacka back out. Really the battle of the Amoongusses here, and Florian actually sends his back as well, getting some more Regenerator possibly, making it just be such a nuisance for Kohei going forward. Sends that Gastrodon back out, who is also still asleep but should be waking up at any moment. The Incineroar goes for a parting shot actually into the Stack Attacka slot on Kohei's side, so no damage, protecting that Shadow Shield on this Lunala, so it burns another turn of sleep, which is really important I think for Kohei.
Yeah, getting closer and closer to when it can wake up. Really, it's just going to pick up knockouts whenever it goes for a Moongeist Beam at this point. The Zacian is switching in, definitely going to be in range, so you do need to be wary of this Lunala. The Shadow Shield is still intact, so the Zacian cannot knock it out in one shot, especially because the Incineroar could switch in at any time to get that Intimidate going down onto the Zacian. At least if it switches in for the Sack Attacker and you go for a fighting move into that slot, that's still going to be doing some huge damage to the Incineroar or pick up the knockout on the Stack Attacker at that point, but that's still going to be ignoring the Lunala. You need to at least break the Shadow Shield so that the Zacian can pick up the knockout with the Behemoth Blade or potentially with the Dark move from the Incineroar.
Yeah, the Incineroar switches in here for the Stack Attacka, possibly trying to take some big close combat or another fighting move from that from the Zacian here. And of course the Fake Out and Intimidate, like we've said a million times. And the timer is starting to come up here, so we are getting close to the end of this match. This close combat isn't enough to knock out this Incineroar, but it does do big damage, but more importantly drops those special defense and defense stats on that Zacian. The Lunala here, I believe, is actually finally waking up, so it is able to get that Moongeist Beam off. Is going to do an easy knockout onto either of the Pokemon, I believe, on Florian's side of the field. This Gastrodon does not take that very comfortably, is knocked out here. So that Gastrodon spent, I believe, every single turn of this game asleep, and it was not able to wake up and do much of anything about it.
Yeah, anything could have been just breaking the Shadow Shield of the Lunala. Still intact once again, and we're down to the last 3 minutes of the match as well. There's been some knockouts being picked up here going into these last few turns. The Amoonguss is going to be able to oh, the game just ended there, so I guess there was a forfeit coming out, and it looked like the Japanese player won there, so I assume that Kohei was able to take that match.
Yeah, Shohei, I believe, was able, or Kohei was able to win that one, I believe, and that is, incredibly high. It doesn't seem that exciting sometimes, but that is incredibly high-level gameplay from both of these players. Absolutely incredible positioning, the patience. You're not just trying to click the super effective button and see what works. It's a lot of really interesting positioning. You have to know, that Trick Room was helpful in the beginning at first, but then, he realized he didn't really need that Trick Room because once you start getting all of that damage down, Andrew Lunala is still protected. You're in a very comfortable spot moving forward.
Yeah, so that seemed like it was a your time run out. I think that's the only way that animation of just a hard cutoff would activate. So it seems like both players taking up a lot of the time. They're almost going down to the time, but ending up Florian using up all of their time at that point. So when you do use up all of your time, you do immediately lose the game. So yeah, very, very long and drawn out game there. Seemed like we were about to make a breakthrough in those last few turns. You were getting a knockout onto the opposing Gastrodon. You got the huge amount of damage down onto the Incineroar as well, would be in range of any attack that the Zacian would have wanted to go for. So yeah, it would have been interesting to see who would have come out on top if it was able to just come down to the battle timer, because both players were down to 3 Pokemon at that point. So it was still definitely anyone's game at that point. But yeah, that was definitely a very, very slow and positionally based game. The Amoonguss is definitely a very key Pokemon for both players here, because you do get those spores down. The Stack Attacker being safety goals definitely helps out with that, because that gives you 2 spore immunities in that case. So yeah, you need to make sure you're still doing some damage to the opposing player. We saw what happened when that Lunala got boosted. Even though the Meteor Beam didn't land into the Incineroar, the preferred target, it still got that boost up. And even though it went to sleep, you could see how much damage it was doing with that Moongeist Beam. Even the Gastrodon sitting at 75% was knocked out in one shot. So that Moongeist Beam can be very strong when you get that boost going. But at the same time, you need to be able to get that offense going in the first place. And the Amoonguss is a very good Pokemon to be able to put a stop to that.
Yeah, Amoonguss is that Pokemon that we see. It really does cause a stalemate. It almost makes it like that one-on-one, like you said earlier. So we'll have to see exactly if those leads are the same. We actually see Incineroar and Amoonguss this time from Florian, and then we see the Lunala and Incineroar from from Shohei's or Kohei's side of the field. So it should be really interesting here. No Amoonguss to stop the Amoonguss on the opponent's side of the field. So maybe that fake out could be really important here, but you then have to worry about possibly taking a dark type move into your own Lunala.
And it looked like the Intimidate went off first from Florian's side of the field, so it does look like there's potential to go for the fake out into the opposing Incineroar on Kohei's side of the field, and then get the Spore off into that Lunala. You do risk yourself taking the Meteor Beam with the Incineroar. That should knock it out in one shot, so that would be a pretty risky play there. Maybe you want to be going just for the switch out of the Incineroar, trying to catch that Meteor Beam once again with the Gastrodon if you brought that to the game again. But then you also need to worry about that Spore going off into the Lunala, whether you're willing to make the trade of the potential knockout onto that Incineroar with the Meteor Beam in return for the sleeping Lunala, so that you've got your boost going and potentially a knockout on the Incineroar as well. But that goes very wrong if that Incineroar does switch out straight away. So there's a lot of ways that this first turn can go, with the opposing fake outs could be landing into the opposing Incineroars, or the Spores going off, or the switching out the Incineroars, but it's actually the Lunalas that's going to be the Pokemon to switch out into the Amoonguss.
Yeah, Lunala switches out into the Amoonguss, but then the Incineroar on Florian's side actually also does a hard switch for the Zacian into the front of the party here. So now that Zacian gets that Intrepid Sword up, because the Incineroar is already on the field, not going to be able to lower that. But then the Incineroar also hard switches here, so both of these players seem to not love their leads. Brings out that Stack Attacker instead. The only thing that stays on the field here is that Amoonguss, and it goes for a Spore, which isn't going to affect either of these 2 Pokemon, because 1 of the safety goggles and 2 the grass typing.
Yeah, I was just waiting for that Amoonguss to switch out as well, but deciding to stay in here, which actually is not very good for the Amoonguss on Florian's side of the field. You're facing down the opposing Amoonguss and the safety goggles Stack Attackers, so Kohei definitely getting the better end of that turn, getting into the 2 Spore immunities that they have on their side of the field. And now you can just start firing off some Gyro Balls into the Zacian, or some Body Presses to try and catch an Incineroar that could switch in, and maybe even just go for a Spore into that Zacian at this point. You've got your Incineroar waiting in the back now at this point, because you have switched it out. You could be switching that in at some point to get the Intimidate down on the Zacian, but Zacian is going to be switching itself out instead into its own Incineroar.
Yeah, and especially, if this Amoonguss for Kohei goes for a Rage Powder or something too, is even if that Zacian was still on the field, that is going to protect this stack attacker for going for something like a Trick Room, but instead the Amoonguss actually switches out after just coming back in, is going to bring in the Incineroar on Kohei's side of the field, so once again, more Intimidates, more Fake Outs, more positioning. Both of these players really playing the long game here. Something that they have to pay attention to here, but instead we actually see the Spore from the Amoonguss into what was the Amoonguss slot, so a great catch there onto that Incineroar on Kohei's side, finally putting that to sleep. And then we see the Gyro Ball from the stack attacker goes into the Incineroar on Florian's side, just does a little bit of damage because that Incineroar is also so slow.
Yeah, and every bit of damage is going to help out. You got the little bit of damage onto the Incineroar. Now you can go for the sort of body presses into that Incineroar and start racking up some good damage there. The Incineroar going to sleep from the Spore isn't ideal because you can't get that damage down on the Amoonguss. You can't break the Occa Berry with the Flare Blitz. So the Amoonguss is still feeling pretty safe, even though it's facing down the safety goggle stack attacker. It's not threatened by that stack attacker. Gyro Ball's not going to be doing too much damage because Amoonguss is so slow, and it does resist that body press as well. But at least you can go for the body press into the Incineroar without the fear of any Rage Powders. Maybe you want to go for the attack into the Amoonguss to try and catch any of the switch-ins, because if it does switch out into the Zacian, that would be very good to catch with the Gyro Ball. And the Amoonguss is switching out here, so let's see if the Sack Attacker did go on the offensive there.
Yeah, it switches out for that Zacian slot, so again, we're seeing the same three Pokemon. We don't know exactly what's in the back. If it is that Gastrodon, it's going to be a really interesting play as well, just to have brought that once again. We see the Incineroar go for a Flare Blitz into the Incineroar on Kohei's side, so doing a little bit of damage here, going to take some recoil on its own. Still, every little bit of damage helps, especially if the stack attacker went for a move. The Incineroar still stays asleep, but instead goes for a Gyro Ball into the Zacian slot, which is a really great read here. Does 50% of the HP to that Zacian just on the switch in.
Yeah, that's what we like to see. Turning on the offense now into this game, nice and slow for the first few games, but getting some very good damage down onto that Zacian. Gyro Balling into that Amoonguss wouldn't have done too much damage, but Gyro Balling into the Zacian puts it in range of another one, so a very, very strong attack coming out from the stack attacker here. The Incineroar still staying asleep, so it does still have the potential to wake up. You could be going for the Flare Blitz and the Gyro Ball into the Zacian, and that should be able to pick up the knockout if one of the attacks is able to land at that point. Or you can try and just pivot around once again with the Incineroar and the stack attacker. You've got some good damage down onto the Zacian. If you go back to the pivoting game and then just try and outposition once again, you've got a slight advantage now that you've got some really good damage down onto the Zacian and a bit of chip down onto the opposing Incineroar as well, so that you can start picking off with something like a Meteor Beam. It's definitely going to be in range at this point with that Lunala, and it has just switched in for that Incineroar.
The stack attacker actually also switches as well, which is going to bring that Amoonguss back out onto the field. So now this Amoonguss could be free to spore either of these two Pokemon in the next turn. Zacian goes for a Behemoth Blade. If this is into what that Lunala slot is, it's going to be really great to break the Shadow Shield, but instead it goes into the Amoonguss and is almost enough to get that one-hit knockout because of that boost from the sword. But then we see the Occa Berry finally break here. This will be the end of the Amoonguss on this turn, so protecting that stack attacker, but instead losing the Amoonguss while actually keeping the Shadow Shield safe. So still, it is a tough loss right there because that Amoonguss was so pivotal, but I think the ability to send in your Incineroar possibly and get another Intimidate off onto this Zacian is going to be really important as well.
Yeah, taking care of the Amoonguss, even this early as well. This is much earlier than the previous game. Does free you up quite a lot, because that's one less piece to be able to switch around. So you can bring in the Incineroar, of course, to get the Intimidate back down onto the Zacian, but being able to take care of the Amoonguss frees up your own Amoonguss once again, because then you don't have to worry about sporing into that slot. And yeah, two very nice back-to-back plays coming out from both players. Kohei with the Gyro Ball into the Zacian, but then the double up from Florian to take care of the Amoonguss as well. Very, very strong play there. You do have Lunala down onto the field, still with the Shadow Shield intact, and the Incineroar has taken a little bit of chip, so a Meteor Beam should be able to pick up the knockout onto that Incineroar. If it does switch out, then you're still going to be allowing the boost to get off onto the Lunala, so its Moongeist Beam would threaten down whatever Pokemon would be switching in that case. And your Incineroar could potentially be waking up at this point, could be getting off a Flare Blitz into the opposing Zacian. You still have to worry about a potential fighting move that could come out, and that is exactly what we're seeing here.
But it is not enough to knock out that close combat. Brings that Incineroar down to 5 HP while lowering the defense and special defense on that Zacian, which is absolutely critical here. The Lunala instead goes for that Meteor Beam, like you said, and because there was no switch, if this is into that Incineroar slot, that is going to be the end of the Incineroar and possibly the end of any super effective Dark-type move on Florian's team that could do that damage to Lunala even through that Shadow Shield. But instead, this will be a really comfortable knockout. That Incineroar now off the field, no more fake-out pressure either on Florian's side of the field, as they both only really have one fake out user to their name on each side. The Incineroar does stay asleep here, but I don't believe it's going to be lasting all that much longer.
Yeah, that's a very crucial sleep there for Kohei. If it was able to wake up, it could have got that Flare Blitz off into the Zacian and picked up the knockout there, and then freed up the Lunala quite a lot. It would have just been able to spam the Moongeist beams at this point. But now that the Incineroar didn't wake up, the Zacian is still on the field, threatening very heavily. It's going to be knocked out by any attack that Florian would want to go for. Even any attack from the Amoonguss would pick it up at this point as well. So you could just go for the attack into the opposing Incineroar. You can get that Spore off pretty freely now into the Lunala. +1 Moongeist beam shouldn't be enough to knock out an Amoonguss. So really, you do have a pretty free Spore going off into the Lunala if you choose to go for it. But then if you do go for that Spore, it does open up the Zacian to be picked up by that +1 Moongeist beam. So it depends whether you feel comfortable letting that Zacian go down in return for the sleep on the Lunala. Otherwise, you can go for the Rage Powder to keep that Zacian safe, and then you can still pick up the knockout onto the Incineroar, which should be waking up if it is allowed to move this turn. So we'll have to see what the Amoonguss is opting to go for. But Zacian's actually not going on the offensive at all. It's be protecting itself.
Yeah, Zacian protects though, and then we see from the Lunala that Moongeist Beam goes into the Zacian slot. Does not do any damage though. Incineroar stays asleep, which is very rough, and then a Spore from that Amoonguss into the Lunala is enough to put that to sleep as well, making Kohei's offensive pressure opportunities absolutely disappear right now, because even if that Incineroar is able to move next turn, it only has 5 HP, and the Zacian's much faster, so it is going to be able to get knocked out by anything that Zacian throws.
Yeah, that's potentially a very killer turn there for Kohei. You got the Lunala guaranteed to be asleep at the end of this turn, and now the Amoonguss can just go on the offensive here, whether it wants to just pick up the knockout on that Incineroar, or just break the Shadow Shield of the Lunala and even heal itself with a Pollen Puff. The Amoonguss has got a huge amount of options here. The Zacian was always going to pick up the knockout on this very low HP Incineroar, so we'll have to see if that Amoonguss is deciding to either break the Shadow Shield or heal that Zacian.
Yeah, the Zacian went for that close combat, so it did drop those defenses once again. Lunala will stay asleep this turn. Actually, a Pollen Puff here will break that Shadow Shield, so a great little turn. Even though you're not doing a whole lot of damage, it's really pivotal because it's going to allow your Zacian to get a really strong breakthrough turn if it's able to knock out this Lunala. And then Stakataka comes in here for that Fallen Incineroar slot. You know, you may have the possibility to get your Trick Room up. It could be a really tough get, though, just because both of these Pokemon are slow than the Zacian on the field.
And if you get the Trick Room up as well, that pretty much means that you're going to get Spored again from the Amoonguss onto the Lunala. At least the Sakataka would be safe at this point, but now you have to just contend with that close combat that could come out from the Zacian. Should be enough to pick up the knockout on the Sakataka. You could go for a Protect on the Sakataka, hope that your Lunala wakes up, but you can still just go for a Rage Powder with the Amoonguss as well. Even if that Lunala is able to wake up, you can just keep that Zacian safe.
Yeah, the Protect here from the Stakataka and a Rage Powder from the Amoonguss on Florian's side. The Zacian does go first here. It goes into that protected Stakataka slot with most likely a close combat here. Lunala, though, actually wakes up and goes for a Moongeist Beam, so getting that really important wake up this turn after not taking any extra damage after that Shadow Shield was broken. Goes into this Amoonguss slot, does just over half of its HP as well, so, neither of the Pokemon here on Florian's side are going to want to take another one of those, and this is really where Florian has to decide if he wants to Pollen Puff his Zacian or not, or if he wants to, maybe just take this damage and let that Zacian possibly get the knockout on that Lunala.
Yeah, at this point, Lunala would be able to pick up the knockout on any Pokemon it attacks with the Moongeist Beam. So Amoonguss would go down if it opts to go for that Rage Powder to try and keep that Zacian safe. Really, you need to be worried about the double protect coming out from the Stakataka at this point. If you go for a Rage Powder in a close combat and you're able to land that attack into the Stakataka, you probably can break through this Lunala with your Zacian and whatever the other Pokemon would be. So we'll have to see if Kohei is going to be opting into that double protect, because you could read into that at the same time and just go for that Behemoth Blade into the Lunala.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to have to see if this turn goes through, though. It does get the double protect off, which is absolutely huge for Kohei here. Not going to worry about taking any damage. The Rage Powder for that Amoonguss, so that is where Florian is prioritizing his damage. Zacian here goes for a close combat into that Stakataka once again. Not going to matter because of that protect. Lunala, while still awake, goes for this Moongeist Beam. Could go into either of these two Pokemon. If it's into the Zacian, that's going to be absolutely huge, but into the Amoonguss as well. I mean, both of those options were huge, right? Because now you still have the ability to do damage onto the Zacian, who can only hurt one of your Pokemon at a time, and it will be knocked out to either move from Lunala or from Stakataka, as we saw each of them do about 50%. And then the Gastrodon comes in here at the end, so bulky Gastrodon doesn't look like it's going to have a lot of offensive pressure for either of these two Pokemon.
Yeah, that double protect's very, very crucial there for Kohei. It was probably game ending if that stack attacker just gets hit by the close combat, but buying that one turn, getting rid of the Amoonguss, that could be the opening that Lunala needs to be able to potentially take this game back for Kohei. If they go for the close combat once again into the stack attacker, that just frees up the Lunala to be able to take care of the Zacian. And Gastrodon probably won't have the offensive pressure to be able to break through this Lunala. So it seems like the Zacian is changing its choice of target here and going for the Behemoth Blade into that Lunala.
Yeah, the Lunala, of course, not loving to take that, but it still takes it pretty comfortably. Not enough to knock it out. Will need to be hit by one more Behemoth Blade for sure. It goes for its own Moongeist Beam in retaliation onto either of these two Pokemon. It's still going to be a lot. We saw how much this did to the Gastrodon with +1. It was able to do almost 100% of the damage while it ate its berry. So this Gastrodon now at low damage here, and then of course the Zacian itself also at under 50%. The Gastrodon here actually goes for a Earth Power here is enough to knock out the Stack Attacker, which is actually really important because now the Stack Attacker wasn't able to get that knockout onto either of these two Pokemon at the end.
Yeah, so the potential to knock out the Zacian there, you'd still lost your Stack Attacker to the Earth Power at that point, and you just need to be able to survive one attack from the Gastrodon at that point, because two Moongeist Beams would be able to pick up the knockout on that Gastrodon, as we saw. From the HP that the Lunala is on, and Gastrodon not being the most offensive Pokemon, probably not able to pick up the knockout on the Lunala, so maybe a missed opportunity for Kohei there to go for that Moongeist Beam into the Zacian, but able to win that endgame with that crucial double protect coming out from the Stack Attacker as well. So yeah, it was still incredibly awkward there for both of these players, but a bit more offense going off from both the players as well. We didn't go down to time there at all. Being able to pick up knockouts a little bit easier than they did before, able to break through the Amoonguss pretty quickly from Florian's side of the field to break through that Amoonguss and put that Incineroar very low as well, which meant that there wasn't really any pivoting options available, especially because that Incineroar was put to sleep as well. So normally what we saw in that game one, the very positional game with the pivoting around, getting the regenerators, getting the fake outs and intimidate switching around, that was taken away pretty quickly in that game too. The Amoonguss dropping very quickly and this Incineroar taking so much damage and being asleep meant that wasn't really an option going forward into that game too. So we'll have to see if there's going to be any adjustments there from both of these players. The Amoonguss is still going to be very crucial, and we'll have to see if they're able to break through that Amoonguss quickly again.
Yeah, and those Amoonguss, like we said earlier, are super critical of this game. It makes this game really slow. It makes you have to really worry about a lot of things like your timer. And the Amoonguss and Incineroar here for Florian. And then we see the Stack Attacker and Lunala, so a switch up here for Kohei's side. So that Incineroar, going to have that fake out opportunity possibly onto the Stack Attacker. But most importantly, this Amoonguss has pretty free reign to possibly put this Lunala to sleep as well.
And very, very nice switch up for the Stack Attacker. It means that you're not caring about the Amoonguss at all. You only have to worry about maybe a fake out from the Incineroar, and you get a body press into that slot, which would be some very nice damage down into the Incineroar. And you've still got the potential Amoonguss in the back that could switch in on any spores and make the opposing Amoonguss pretty much useless that turn, and that may be what we're seeing here.
Yeah, Lunala switches out, brings in the Amoonguss, like you said, not going to want to deal with possibly any spores. The Incineroar also actually switches out here, so that is not going to do any fake out damage or anything, possibly like a Flare Blitz to the switch to Amoonguss, and the Gastrodon instead comes in here. And then we see from the Stack Attacker a Heavy Slam onto the Gastrodon, which is also a pretty decently heavy Pokemon for its size, so it doesn't take a ton of damage here, just about a third of its HP. And that Amoonguss did go for a Spore into either of these two targets, it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, so the Amoonguss on Florian's side of the field, not too useful here. Can still get those Pollen Puffs to heal up the Gastrodon. The Body Press doing a reasonable amount of damage to that Gastrodon, but able to heal it up pretty nicely with the Pollen Puffs as well. But we did see that there was the Grass Knot on the Amoonguss on Kohei's side of the field very early in that game one. So that is definitely a potential option to go for into that Gastrodon. And your own Amoonguss isn't really threatened down too much, but your Stack Attacker is. So whether you want to go for the Grass Knot into that Stack Attacker, maybe switch out your Stack Attacker to avoid the powers that could come out, or just keep the Stack Attacker safe by going for the Rage Powders instead.
Actually, Gastrodon switching out here, though, and that is going to bring in the Incineroar for Florian's side. So that Incineroar, once again, fake out pressure, intimidate, all of that good stuff. But it does mean that you're not going to be dealing with an Earth Power this turn, or, even worrying about taking that Grass Knot damage if that is what happened here. But instead of Rage Powder from Kohei's Amoonguss, going to be redirecting any moves, but not even really, because the only thing that could be attacking would be that Amoonguss, which went for another Spore onto either of these Pokemon, which did not do any damage, while the Stack Attacker here goes for a Heavy Slam into the Incineroar. So really interesting read there from Florian, possibly looking for a switch in.
Yeah, and the body press able to cover both the Incineroar switch in and still deal some good damage to the Gastrodon, because you're not really going to care about the Intimidates at all because your defense is so high and not being affected by the Intimidates. Body pressed it being able to do some very good damage to the Incineroar. But in this position at least, you've still got the Amoonguss faster than the Stack Attacker. You can go for a Pollen Puff once again into the Incineroar and just recover all that damage from the body press.
Yeah, Lunala switches in here actually for the Amoonguss on Kohei's side. Stack Attacker also switching as well. Gonna bring in the Incineroar on his side as well on top of that. So again, these games are so positional. They are, you know, you don't see as many hard switches in games these days. You know, you see a lot of U-turns, you see a lot of parting shots. But instead we get the fake out onto the Incineroar on Kohei's side. So then we see a Pollen Puff from the Amoonguss on Florian's side into his own Incineroar. So that is gonna bring it up almost all the way up to full HP, as it was just under half earlier in the game.
Yeah, with that fake out, that Pollen Puff became completely free. So now that Incineroar going to be healed up once again, can start going for the pivoting action. You still have to be wary of the Meteor Beam that can come out at any time from that Lunala, but you do only get one use of that, so you do need to be very wary. Because this is such a positional game, it's likely that Incineroar is going to be switching out once again. You do need to be wary of that whenever that Meteor Beam can come out from the Lunala, but you do need to be wary of when you pull that trigger effectively, because when you get that Meteor Beam off, you probably want to be leaving your Lunala on the field because you want to be making use of that special attack boost. So no Meteor Beam coming out here. It's going to be a switch out into the Stack Attacker instead.
Yeah, and a switch out for the Incineroar on Florian's side as well, and that is going to be bringing in his own Zacian. So again, positional, you're not having that Lunala, it's not in the space that it wants to be in yet. That Zacian's really comfy to be out there and get that Intrepid Sword boost while Incineroar is already on the field, but it goes for a parting shot here into that Zacian slot, so it's going to be immediately losing that boost and then repositioning once again for Kohei here. If Kohei went for something like a Spore into the slot where the Stack Attacker was, it's not going to be very useful, but if it went into a Spore where actually into either of these slots, sorry, because that Amoonguss switches in, but instead it does go for a Spore. We're not sure exactly which target it is, but that means that it is not going to be getting off any sleep onto any of the Pokemon on Kohei's side.
Yes, shows why the safety goggles is a very strong pick for all the Stack Attacker. Having two switch-ins into the Spore means that when you've got both the Amoonguss and the Stack Attacker on the field, that Amoonguss's Spore just becomes completely useless. You can still try and catch some switch-ins, like we've seen happen already in the previous games, because the Stack Attacker and the Amoonguss aren't threatening the opposing Amoonguss too much. You do need to be switching out into that Incineroar or the Lunala to be able to threaten that down, but then that does give an opportunity for that Zacian to go on the offensive here. So you do need to be worried about the attack coming out from the Zacian, but apparently not, because it is going to be switching once again.
Yeah, that switches in for the Incineroar on Florian's side here. Again, fake out pressure like we've seen, but even though they've had so much fake out pressure, we haven't seen a whole lot of fake out because it is so there are so many hard switches in this game. A Rage Powder though for the Amoonguss on Kohei's side, not gonna really bother with the Amoonguss on Florian's side, which did go for another Spore here, and then a Trick Room actually from the Stack Attacker. So that Stack Attacker, those safety goggles are huge because it is able to get that Trick Room off and maybe help its partner Pokemon Lunala in the back.
Yeah, but this is still awkward for positioning the Pollen Puff as well with the Amoonguss. Now you can't get the body press off before the Pollen Puff would go off. So really, you could just leave your Incineroar on the field, take the body press, and then heal yourself up with the Pollen Puff once again. You could be spored from the opposing Amoonguss into the Incineroar. You could go for a fake out to put a stop to that, but it's actually a fake out into the Stack Attacker instead.
Yeah, a critical hit on that fake out, of course, not really a move that really matters here. Stack Attacker flinches as it was the Pokemon that would go first. A Grass Knot from the Amoonguss on Kohei's side into Florian's. Incineroar does very little damage here. We also then see another Spore from the Pokemon, the Amoonguss on Florian's side. So this Amoonguss really just trying to go for as many Spores as it can and is not paying off.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter when it's sporing the Stack Attacker on Amoonguss. Even though it's not doing anything, it's stopping switches from being able to happen from Kohei's side of the field. So if it just keeps going for a Spore, then it really limits the damage potential that could come out into the Amoonguss on Florian's side of the field. There is a switch out now from the Amoonguss into the Incineroar, so if the Spore does hit that slot, that's going to be a very, very nice catch for Florian.
Yeah, and this is a great way too to time out these Trick Room turns, especially for that Zacian in the back. Stack Attack, it goes for a body press here onto the Incineroar on Florian's side. Does a really good amount of damage though. This Incineroar doesn't have a berry activate yet, which is interesting to see, but it does take that Pollen Puff from the Amoonguss on his side, so that is going to heal it up back over half of its HP. And then we also see the Incineroar go for a Flare Blitz here into the opposing Incineroar slot, so not doing a whole lot of damage, but that was originally that Amoonguss here. So we'll have to see if this Amoonguss didn't actually even go for that Spore because of that Pollen Puff. So now that switch in was about as free as you could get it.
And now you've got some offensive pressure onto the opposing Amoonguss. You still need to contend with the Trick Room at least, so maybe you need to get the Fake Out down into the Amoonguss to stall out the Trick Room turns so you can get that Flare Blitz off. But we've already seen the Aqua Berry on that Amoonguss as well, so even if that Flare Blitz is able to land into the Amoonguss, it's still going to be doing too much damage. But catching a Zacian switch in from the Incineroar would be very beneficial for that Flare Blitz.
Yeah, Zacian getting that Intrepid Sword though, so either of these Pokemon not going to love to take it, but instead we see the Fake Out here from the Amoonguss, so that is actually really interesting, especially if we see a Gyro Ball. We do see a Body Press though into the Zacian from the Stack Attack, still a decent chunk of damage, you know, just about a third of the HP, but now, you know, both of these Pokemon, if you go for a Rage Powder, you're still going to deal with a Flare Blitz, and you're going to still break that Aqua Berry, but now, you know, that Zacian's in a tougher spot, I think.
There should be one more turn of Trick Room if my calculations are right there. So maybe you can go for the Spore into the Incineroar to stop that Flare Blitz from coming out. It doesn't look like the Zacian would be in range of a Gyro Ball that could come out from the Zacian. And you also still need to worry about an Incineroar switch in that could happen on that Gyro Ball. Maybe you go for a Body Press to try and cover for that, but then you're not doing as much damage to the Zacian, and that would free up a reasonable amount to be able to get off a huge Behemoth Blade or close combat into these two fighting weak Pokemon. So still definitely a very positional game, and no one's truly broken through anything yet. We'll have to see if that happens in the next few turns.
Yeah, Incineroar switches out here for the Amoonguss on Kohei's side, possibly to stop another Spore. We see the Gyro Ball from the Stack Attack into the Zacian, gets it down to just above 25% of its HP, and then we see the Pollen Puff once again onto the Zacian from the Amoonguss. So this Amoonguss is keeping all the Pokemon on Florian's side healthy, and if we do go into something like a Timer Stall, it is going to be important, especially because the Stack Attack is now knocked out and the number of Pokemon are not even. So if the Pokemon number does even out, of course, the timer at the end, if it is even, is going to depend on total HP percentage amongst all of the Pokemon, so having that Pollen Puff go off can be really important if you're playing towards that end game.
And I said the breakthrough in the next few turns. It turns out it was this turn to knock out the Stack Attacker and claim that Pokemon advantage. So yeah, taking care of the Stack Attacker at this point means that's one less Spore switch in for Kohei's side of the field. That means that there will be a Pokemon that can be spored always on the field at this point. That is Lunala at this point. So going to be threatening some damage with the Moongeist Beam, but you haven't got the Meteor Beam going yet. So Moongeist Beam isn't going to be strong enough to take care of the Zacian or the Amoonguss at this point. And you still got the Incineroar waiting in the back. You can switch that in, ready for the Intimidate onto the Zacian, but then that could open up the potential to be spored if you do go for the Spore into the Amoonguss slot, if that's the Pokemon and does end up switching. But really, there's not too much stopping this Amoonguss on Florian's side of the field at this point. Lunala won't be strong enough to knock it out in one shot, so it would be opened up to a Spore. You could switch into the Incineroar and go for a Protect, so that you can get that Fake Out pressure going to free up the Lunala for a turn, but then that would just allow Zacian free reign of whatever it wants to do this turn.
Yeah, and we do get that switch into the Incineroar from that Amoonguss, so technically both Pokemon on the field could be spored here. Just depends on exactly what they went for. The Zacian, though, goes for his own Protect on Florian's side. Not going to want to take any damage if that Meteor Beam was the move of choice here. Instead, we also see that Protect from the Lunala, like you said, so that's not going to be dealing any damage, but the Spore here, though, goes into that protected Lunala slot, so nothing here has been put to sleep, and that Incineroar has that Fake Out option for the next turn, but still could both be put to sleep later in the next turn or later in the game.
So opting for the protects from both restricteds here, no damage down onto the field at this point. At least you can put a stop to the spores that come out from the Amoonguss this turn if you do go for the Fake Out. Maybe even a Moongeist Beam and a Flare Blitz would knock out the Amoonguss. It would be close with the Aqua Berry and the fact that you don't have your boost from the Meteor Beam yet. Maybe you go for the Meteor Beam just to get that boost, because it would be slightly stronger than that than the Moongeist Beam just at neutral, because you do get that special attack boost. But yeah, the Amoonguss is going to be switching out instead, so it's going to be into the Incineroar. That would definitely be the good target for that Meteor Beam.
Yeah, the Incineroar would be an awesome target, especially if Kohei made that call, possibly went for it, even just assuming there might be a Rage Powder just to deal with that damage. So it's just going to have to depend, but we get the fake out here actually from the Incineroar onto that slot. Zacian goes for a close combat into the Incineroar. Is not enough to knock it out though, gets it down to just 12 HP here and lowers this defense and special defense, which could be really important if that Zacian stays on the field here. We do actually see the Moongeist Beam charging up, so neither of the Pokemon on Florian's side of the field are going to want to take that. One, the Incineroar because just of the typing, but then two, that special defense and defense drop, especially with that special attack boost now from that Meteor Beam. So if it went for the Zacian, that's going to be absolutely huge to stop it, but even if it went in that Incineroar, either way, that Zacian is getting knocked out here, so that close combat was really important, and I believe, was that a critical hit as well?
That was a critical hit, yeah.
Oh my goodness, that is absolutely huge.
That could have mattered there because of the typing not being a super effective hit there, being not very effective, but you did drop your defenses by going for that close combat. If you didn't drop your defenses, you're not being KO'd to that Meteor Beam most likely. So yeah, very, very crucial critical hit there. Now that Lunala has freed itself up quite a bit by taking care of that Zacian. You still have to contend with the Incineroar at this point, and it's still got a reasonable amount of HP, and you can't go for the Meteor Beam at this point anymore. That's definitely what Kohei needed to be able to take care of one of Florian's Pokemon. You've got your boosted Lunala now at this point. You can start firing off those really powerful Moongeist beams. You still got your Amoonguss waiting in the back to be able to help that Lunala, but the Amoonguss is still at full HP on Florian's side of the field. Probably not going to be strong enough to knock it out with a double up, and you're definitely not going to be doubling up if you're switching your Incineroar into the Amoonguss.
Yeah, the Incineroar here actually goes for a Flare Blitz into this Amoonguss slot here, which is going to be eating its Aqua Berry finally at this point in the game. We'll still be doing a really nice amount of damage even through that berry, and gets the burn, which is really important here moving forward as well. The recoil that Incineroar takes is important though, but the Spore actually goes off from the Amoonguss on Florian's side before this Lunala can move. So now this Lunala is asleep, and it's not going to be able to do any real damage moving forward. You know, even if that Shadow Shield is broken in the next turn by this Incineroar.
I quite like that play coming out from Kohei. You're going for the Trick Room there so that Amoonguss can outspeed. Either you get your Amoonguss into Trick Room so you can spore the opposing Incineroar, or you burn a turn of sleep immediately from the Lunala, so it's more likely to be waking up this turn. So the Amoonguss just switching in here, eating up that Flare Blitz, and then switching straight back out into the Incineroar to get that Intimidate down onto the opposing Incineroar.
Yeah, that opposing Incineroar too. If this is knocked out this turn from another Flare Blitz, you know, you don't have that opportunity for Fake Out in the next turn. But instead, we do see actually the Lunala wakes up here, so that one turn of sleep, absolutely critical because of that Trick Room. Gets this Moongeist Beam off into the Incineroar on Florian's side. Is not enough to knock it out though, just because of that Dark typing can be so strong. The Incineroar though goes for a Flare Blitz into the Incineroar on Kohei's side, is able to get that knockout eventually. Now that Incineroar is off the field, that means Kohei is down to his last two Pokemon, but there is a little bit of chip there from that recoil, but the Pollen Puff here is going to negate all of that by bringing this Incineroar back up over half of its HP and make it much more threatening to deal with, especially if it knows a Dark type move that could possibly do super effective damage onto this Lunala.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen that fourth move on that Incineroar yet, so if it's a Dark type move, that is going to put it heavily in Florian's favor, especially with that Pollen Puff recovering the Incineroar. There's not really too many ways of damaging that Incineroar now. You've used up your Meteor Beam, you only have Moongeist Beam, and some Pollen Puffs and some Grass Knots coming out from your own Amoonguss as well. You really need to get that Incineroar to sleep. You definitely can do that. If you just go for a Protect and a Spore, you can get that Incineroar to sleep if it doesn't target down the Amoonguss, but your Aqua Berry has also been used up at this point as well. Even though you've got the Intimidate down onto the Incineroar, it will still be doing some very good damage to the Amoonguss as well. And if you take care of the Amoonguss, that's going to take care of any potential Pollen Puffs into the Lunala as well to get rid of any of the healing.
Yeah, we see the Amoonguss though on Florian's side goes for that Rage Powder, so trying to take any of these moves that this Lunala could possibly throw at it. We don't see a Protect, we do see the Moongeist Beam, so that will be going into the Amoonguss that Florian just used that Rage Powder on. Gonna still do a pretty good amount of damage, especially at +1, does over half, so it's only gonna be able to take 2 of those. We do actually see here the Throat Chop from that Incineroar into that Shadow Shield on the Lunala is able to break it, while a Grass Knot comes out for good measure into that Incineroar, just getting it under half of its HP to possibly not be able to take another move in the future.
Yeah, the Dark type move is really going to put it into Florian's favor at this point, because the Shadow Shield has been broken and you're going to be in range of another one at this point. So really the Incineroar is going to be taking this game for Florian most likely. You've got to go for a Meteor Beam really if you want to knock it out in one shot, and have to take that one turn of charge, because if you go for a Moongeist Beam, that just gets healed up by the Pollen Puff from the Amoonguss, and you can even just keep the Incineroar safe by going for that Rage Powder.
Yeah, that Rage Powder here just means that this Moongeist Beam will have actually knocked it out at this point, just with the amount of damage that it did in that last turn. So it will get that threat off of the field, but you still have this Incineroar with a Throat Chop that should still be able to knock it out. And if this Incineroar is safety goggles, like I'm now suspecting at this point, as we haven't seen it eat a berry, this Amoonguss isn't going to be able to put it to sleep and then slowly whittle down its health. So that is pretty much, I believe, the end of the game here for Kohei, because I don't believe he can really do a whole lot left, especially now because this Incineroar is faster and could still get off a Flare Blitz and get the KO on the Amoonguss here, as timer really ticks down to that 3 minutes, and that Gastrodon is still on the field as well.
Yeah, the Incineroar should be able to do it at this point. Maybe it did reveal the safety goggles, but I don't think either our Japanese is the greatest here. So yeah, the Incineroar going to be able to seal up that end game, and France is going to take this game 2-1, and that is going to put them at a 5-3 record. So France have managed to defeat Japan this week. So a very impressive feat coming out from France, and yeah, just a very slow paced game there. He's showing all the positioning coming out with a few bursts of offense coming out occasionally, but yeah, very positionally based game there coming out for Kohei and Florian.
I know our French players in chat are absolutely freaking out right now. It's a really huge win for them. Tying is still very good moving forward positionally, but beating a team like Japan, who absolutely played at the top of their game during the very first round of groups, is absolutely, it's very morale boosting. And I mean, it's also just incredibly difficult to do. So it's a huge win for them, but it is a great morale boost as a team. So, an absolutely great way to end your Sunday, your end of your streams, especially beating, Shohei, who's an incredibly talented player. Florian was super patient, and that's something you really have to appreciate. I mean, both of these players were super patient. That's why this was about an hour-long game for Jamie and I to look at, because all 3 games went very long, and there was a lot of times where the balance was kind of in both players' favor. So, it really just depended on looking 3-4 turns ahead, really, at what possibly you can do, like, not accounting for something like a crit on that Zacian, which was still pretty big, but even then, Florian was still able to play his way out of there when that is a disadvantageous position for him to be in. So really great job by both of those players.
Yeah, so definitely a cool way to end out this stream. So that's going to be it for us for this week. That's going to be the end of the first week, and we're going to be coming back next week with some more action, the week 2 of the second round of group stages for this World Cup of Pokemon VGC. So that is going to be it for us for today, and we hope you join us next week.